Great. Okay, so here I am with Adrian Kinney, owner of Mid-Mod Colorado Real Estate, and we've been mid-century friends for a while now, and I had so much fun coming out to be there for Denver Modernism Week a couple of years ago. It's always fun to really just go down deep into something with a fellow mid-century obsessive. So one of the things that's been on my mind recently is the policy and the social why behind our mid-century homes. And I know you've spent a lot of time deep diving into the history of Denver specifically. When you, I guess, what does that bring up for you when you think about the history of how we got these houses, how we got them in this spatial layout?
Right.
What's that
Yeah,
story?
absolutely. First of all, hello again. Thank you for having me here. It's so nice to see you. Always great to chat with agreed the crazy mid-century folks like ourselves and just really deep dive into all of this.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it was, I'm sure most of the listeners know this whole modernist movement was coming about at the time about how the house interacts with the ability and how to live in the property, where before it was basically like, humans just figured out we could do structures to live in. And then it was like, how can we actually live in them versus just here's a bedroom and a bathroom and, a basic layout. And then it was, really, how can you live? What does the living space look like? What is, bedroom layouts? How does it connect with everything? And that was really obviously what modernism was about, was really making it accessible to outside, super easy living structure for the occupants of the property, but as well as for entertaining purposes. Obviously, the classic 50s and 60s parties of the era were a big thing.
Yeah.
So it was how does it interact? How does it interact with two people in the house, with two people and kiddos, and then with a medium or large size party? And how does it don't need a big house to make the smaller sections work for entertaining? Obviously the light coming in and out for the big windows, the connections to courtyards. And that was that whole, again, that modernist and connection to outdoors. And really, I know we always talk about the indoor outdoor connection today. And so this is really where it came from, is that whole modernist style of, hey, these houses should be really kind of one with the land and connected so that you really can live in and out, that, maybe the square footage is smaller than some of these stacked, we call them the square homes that we have here, the Denver squares, where they were the Sears craft homes that were shipped over on crates. And they were basically 800 square foot basements, 800 square foot first floors, and 800 square foot upper floors. Bathroom got put on the upper floor because they needed gravity, and they eventually did indoor plumbing. And that was kind of like, you know, 3 times 800. And that's what it had. And a lot of these mid mods were 1,000 to 1,200 square feet. When in comparison, that was quite a bit smaller than three stacked 800 square footers. And
Right.
so it was kind of that like, well, they live bigger because it's on one floor, but at the end of the day, it's only, a half or two-thirds of the square footage. So it was really this like, well, you can go outside and you've got connections to the land and the windows that, was just a very ahead of its time kind of styling and theory about how you live in a property.
Yeah. And that feels like a big part of the story of the West, of Denver. How much, well, actually, this is a question I don't know even a beginning of the answer to. How much of Denver was there before the mid-century era? It was a city. Was it sizable? How much did it expand during the sort of post-war boom?
Absolutely. So Denver really saw most of our construction time during the 1950s and 60s for the most part. Denver really obviously came on the map during the gold rush. That was, the big thing that we had here and really put, Denver where it is on the map for that reason, for the gold rush. We didn't really have much until the 1950s ish. And this is kind of generally for Denver proper. I know a lot of the statistical means are including the west side of town, which is Arvada, Wheat Ridge, and Lakewood, some of Aurora, which is east of Denver. But Denver itself, really, if you kind of just take the schematics of when it was built, most all of it was 1950s and 1960s. Denver's a pretty sprawling city. We're actually a city and county metro that's been merged together. But if you look at it, we go pretty far to Littleton, basically down in the southwest corner. And then we go all the way up to DIA, which is our major airport, which was a huge land grab going north and east through Aurora, essentially. So we go a big, long diagonal for the town. But most of it, the downtown core was, 1880 to 1910. We really don't have many date stamps of single family homes that were built in the 1920s and 30s. There's a really small pocket, kind of where I live in the southeast part of Denver, that has a 1930s date stamp. Why
Mhm.
we don't have many cool Art Decos. We just didn't have many built in that 1930s time frame. Almost nothing in the 1940s, and then really early 1950s, truthfully about 1954 through 1965 is when Denver was just exploding, which obviously coincided well with this whole modernist movement that was happening at the time, where, this theoretical idea of living, like we just talked about, paired over really well with this whole explosion that Denver was seeing for housing.
Yeah.
So, we were essentially a flyover city for such a long time between coast and coast that, no one really stopped here. But for the 1950s and 60s, we just had a huge, huge boom of all structures that were built in 1950s and 1960s. Thus, we were able to actually get a larger sum of mid-century modern houses.
Hmm.
And my team and I, over the years, have found 6 to 7 thousand in the Denver metro area of true mid-century modern houses. And while that number seems large, yeah, on the average is pretty small, like the percentage. But again, for being a flyover city, like that's a pretty large number of these like cutting edge style of homes that were being built. So it was really cool that we ended up with that. We had a downturn, I think it was a national downturn, if I remember correctly, late 60s onward, that kind of just slowed building in general. But Colorado and Denver especially just had a massive boom in the 50s and 60s. The burbs around Denver really saw a 1980s and 90s building kind of conglomerate going on. But Denver itself really has 1890s and 1910, and then 1950s and 60s is probably 80+% of our build dates here.
So 1890s, that this is my lack
Yeah.
of Western history. Was that in the gold rush era, or what was the economic driver of that?
Yeah, it was just after it. Essentially, that was a lot of the kind of the gold rush and the excitement around it. And then obviously, as the gold goes with most of the other cities, it's a very boom and bust kind of
And then
thing
people just
where,
stayed.
yep, they stayed and they also left. And you'll find a lot of our Colorado's never been a growth city until about 2014. We've always been this boom and bust kind of cycle where, again, that 1890s, 1920s, it was just the spot to be. Everything was happening. All the stuff was being built. It was the spot. But really, after, gosh, 1910, 1920, you'll be hard pressed to find a lot of build dates on structures within Denver because it just totally collapsed.
Interesting.
Then it came back in the 1950s and 60s. It was a little better. It kind of putzed along, and this little slow growth here and there. We followed the .com really big, but really from about 2014 onward is the longest just growth cycle. We're still in it now that Denver itself has ever seen, where we're really used to this kind of cyclical, okay, boom and bust, and major boom, major bust. Where now it's kind of been kind of a constant upward trend, which is just fascinating to see, given we've never had this in our history
Yeah.
before.
Well, in these days, it feels like Denver's a lifestyle city. You want to go there because
100% it
you
is.
are a hiker, because you're a skier, you want to be near mountains, and then you
Yep.
find a job or you remotely work in a way that lets
Yes.
you be there.
Yes.
What was the economic driver in the post-war period? Was there a lot of industry around there, or?
Yeah, a lot of industry was being built. Just things were happening here. It was a place to be. So there was, new construction. We had a lot of industrial coming in that was as well here. A lot of factories and plants. Various business. We were kind of that big city in the Midwest. I know, there were still others in the time, but we were really coming to be. So it was a really exciting thing for it. It was at that time some of the outdoors that we had. I don't see proximity to the mountains. As we get in the 50s and 60s, it's not as exciting where, if there's a giant snowstorm, you can't get up there as easy as you can today kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yes, that was a lot of the big drivers for it was, just the industries that were coming in. We had actually a lot of, for the health side of stuff, it's actually why my paternal grandparents came here because of our super dry and high air that we have and the colder temperatures. A lot of places that had renowned doctors were saying that if you had asthma or suffered from some type of lung or breathing issues, to actually send you to Colorado because of the high dry air that we had.
Oh,
So yeah, that was actually my grandpa was
interesting.
kind of sent here for that. That they were like, hey, you've got pretty bad asthma. Go to Denver. It's going to be a great spot for you. So that was kind of interesting. Again, not the entire world didn't come here for that, but that was something that was happening.
But
That they're like, hey,
it
it's the
was a
high
draw.
desert. go to Denver, go to Colorado. It's a spot for you. And it was kind of the growing city, so it was exciting, and a lot was just happening. It was a very, again, the spike in 10 years, and then it kind of just faded back off and then picked back up, a couple decades later.
That mid-century moment. I mean, it was a boom time all over, but it's interesting to sort of see the different drivers of why people went to specific places.
Yeah.
I know a little further southwest, the advent of affordable home air conditioning was really a big movement to like the boom around Phoenix and all of Arizona and a lot of California
Yes. Yep.
was about being able to sort of create conditioned indoor air in hot
Oh
places
yeah.
and endure them. Is that, I remember being quite shocked when I was in Denver by how little it seemed people paid attention to heating, but do they air condition in Denver or do you just kind of live with the climate?
We do now. Obviously, with kind of climate changing to consistently warmer, consistently longer.
Yeah.
Yes, they're paying more attention to it. When these homes were built originally, they were actually perfect for the climate. Aside from the two tail ends, we do get very cold here and we do get very hot here, but in the bell curve of things, the hot and the cold aren't, as much as people think for being, a mountain town per se. We still get to -20 and we do get 100 plus on the tail ends, but most of the year
Rarely.
is kind of, yes, it's, we
Yeah.
get one or two of each of those a year. But most of these homes didn't have air conditioning when they started. Again, our summers would peak at maybe a 90, mid 90s here and there. They really stayed kind of that high 80s, low 90s is like the highs of it. Where now, even when I was growing up, I think we broke like 20, 30 days straight of 90 plus that we had here. That, again, had that been in the 50s and 60s, like it's hot. And a lot of the reason the cooling kind of came here is we have what we call evaporative or swamp coolers here.
Mhm.
And I know anyone listening in a wet climate is going to think we're crazy for this. We are considered the high desert here. So again, we are a mountainous town that is technically a dry, very arid climate. So what we have are evaporative coolers or swamp coolers that put basically cool, moist air into the properties. It's kind of a glorified, think of basically wet cardboard, but a much nicer version that stays kind of wet or damp. And then there's a fan that pulls air in and over the kind of damp surface and into your property. So it's a very natural, very energy efficient, awesome way to cool your property. But the key part of that is you have to have cool outside temperatures for that to really work. And Denver, because we are the desert, we get the obviously really big swings of the high highs and the low lows, even during summer. So
Right.
that at nighttime, you can use either an attic fan or an evaporative cooler, and you can really cool your house down to that, mid 60s, lock it up for the day. And even if it's high 80s or 90s, it only, gets up to 70 by the, time the sun sets, and then you kind of repeat the cycle. When we have
Yeah.
90s and 100s and you can't get that 60-degree overnight and it's at that 70 or 80 overnight, the evaporative coolers just can't keep up, unfortunately. And if you have a whole month of that, you just can't get your house cool without air conditioning.
Yeah.
So as these were built, almost none of them actually had AC, again, because it just wasn't needed. You could use attic fans, you could do crosswinds. A lot of the mid-centuries had kind of the north-facing windows would open and operate. The south-facing would as well, and you'd get that north breeze that would kind of pull that air through naturally. A lot of the like semi-custom or custom designed homes, Arapahoe Acres, Arapahoe Hills down in Littleton and Englewood, they all have those in them. So you'll see that quite often. But again, as things are just hotter, longer, the evaporative coolers became, and then the evaporative coolers struggle a lot, especially when you really do have those 90s and 100s.
Yeah.
And again, part of, again, touching on it's slightly political, the climate change, we have a lot of fires, unfortunately, that are happening more often in Colorado. When we have a summer fire and you're pulling in some of that kind of, unfortunately, dust burned air, it pulls that campfire smell into your property as well too. If you have asthma or allergies, you start suffering from bringing
Right.
in that from outside. So it's just, that's what a lot of houses had. It worked for a very long time, especially the 50s and 60s, as it was warmer, just not like today. And now, 50, 60 years later, you pretty much have to have AC in the property, just because it is, these aren't made for super hot or cold. All mid-centuries are. They're really made for that California, 60 to
Yeah.
80, low 80 range. And anything above that, they don't do super well in. And since we do get above, 85 and below 50 here, they struggle on those tail ends.
Right. No, they work better to sort of moderate a swing in
Yes.
temperature rather than
Yeah.
to push against it, really. So, and
Yes. They,
that's one of the
they keep a
reasons
good
that
medium.
I love the Denver architecture specifics because they feel so Californian. They feel so pure. And in the
Yeah.
Midwest, we always have to be we always have to be doing a little bit more in Wisconsin, in Minnesota, in Michigan. We're doing a bit more to sort of keep the house a box because our temperatures have always been a little bit more intense, particularly on the cold end. And there's
Yep.
just, you can't
Oh
live
yeah.
with a beautiful sheet of glass. There are houses like that, and what they tend to be is just deeply uncomfortable winter
Yeah,
long. So
they get tough, and here it's we do have the super hot and cold are a little tougher to keep, but we do have a lot more moderated here in Denver metro area, and because also we don't have the humidity, our cold and our hot are just less intense here because of that. A freezing in Minnesota around the lakes versus freezing here. It's a lot warmer in a 32 when there's not a wind chill of minus 100 billion because it's
right?
just that it's biting and we don't really get the humidity here at all because we're
It's
essentially the high desert.
it makes such a difference. That whole it's a dry heat thing. It
It is.
really
I
is
know everyone's
better.
like, oh, it's a dry heat. That's one of those like, you're from Colorado and you call it a dry heat, but it does, it's, not great for your skin and various other things that, for the long run. But
But it's
it,
more
for
tolerable.
house stuff, it's, if it's 100 and dry heat, it's uncomfortable, but it's not, permeating through every part of the house because of the humidity. It's just dang hot.
Yeah. Yeah, this is sidebar for people not in Denver, but if you're listening to this because you're curious about what it's like in other places, it's one of the most important things I think for air conditioning units in muggy areas is not to oversize the unit because if the house can cool itself before it can dehumidify itself, you end up with a muggy, clammy cold, which is deeply unpleasant. So HVAC guys are like a lot of sort of good old boy fellows who are just like bigger is better. But actually, I'm always like, you know what? You want a very small unit that works really hard all the time, that's cooling and dehumidifying constantly, not something that's going to like, whoop, now the temperature's cold and no amount of layering is going to keep you from feeling sort of
Yep,
sticky and moist.
that monkey. Yep, and
Yeah,
that's the nice thing about ours is here, like you can slightly oversize in Denver because we don't have to dehumidify the air as much.
to get a fast
Uh,
result. Yeah.
yes, obviously we do, and it's nice on ours. Ours is slightly oversized for the house, but again, like if we honestly see a relative humidity over 20%, it has to be raining. Like it just like that's it's dry here, so it's one of those everyone's like, oh, it's it's Denver, and our relative humidity is honestly very low. And I say this as I look out, we're gonna have about 48 hours of rain here in Denver, which usually means like floods and like just we have clay soil where the desert again is just what we have. So when you get that kind of rain in that amount of time, we just flood.
Just
So
moisture.
it's just that very opposite. Yeah, we just don't get this much rain ever. And so when we get it this much at a single spot, like these last 2 days are going to be amazing. It's going to be a drought buster for some parts of the state. So we're very grateful for it. But it's one that like if we honestly get 3 or 4 days straight of just constant rain, there will be floods because we don't have the soil for it. We don't have anything for it. And except looking out right now, it's to me 2 days of no sun and this overcast is like, oh, I'm going crazy. But it's just, we're used to so much sun here that, very happy for this because it has been a very unfortunately hot and warm and dry winter that we had. So our snowpack was down quite a bit in most of the state.
So this will help that a lot to sort of mitigate
Yes.
that. That's
Yeah. So
great.
as we're talking about like the humidity, even though it's like super humid for us outside that it just rained, like it doesn't feel it because we're just so dang dry here that it's when it feels like I'm in California and I go outside, I'm like, this is weird. This is Colorado. We don't have this here.
It's so fun to see how the specificity of microclimates does affect. And I think as we've gone on, and maybe the mid-century era kind of kicked this off with a lot of universalized housing materials and techniques, but particularly today, I think we kind of build a McMansion anywhere, in any
Yep.
orientation, in
Yep.
any climate, and don't really pay a whole lot of attention to how the specifics of that space should affect the building scale and cooling techniques and shading and all those things. So
Oh,
it's really fun to
absolutely.
see it still lingering in the early mid-century era in particular, that the housing stock of Denver really does respond to it.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
been fascinating to see, and like we do have a whole bunch of the Hutcherson was a big builder that we had here, but it's the classic brick ranch that I had cousins in Cali, and every time they came out, they called them very Colorado houses, where they're 1,000 square feet brick ranch, one car garage on one side or the other, and then the basement that was 1,000 square feet, very Midwest, as you will.
Yeah.
But they were just the lack of a better word, the socialist thing to build because they were easy to build. They had these stick frame built, rectangles. They could easily do a brick facade, the one car garage for, the one person that would go to work downtown. Like they were easy formulaic to build. And so all over the Midwest, as things were just booming in the 50s and 60s, they were just built, left and right, left and right. And they were essentially all the same. The garage may switch side that it's on. You may have a gable one way or the other, but otherwise they were just kind of popped up everywhere and, very very Midwest kind of feeling, which Denver got a lot of, even though we're kind of the Rocky Mountain high desert. We got a lot of the classic, brick ranches all over the area here.
The mid-century modest, the more
Exactly that. Yep.
basic end. Yeah.
Yeah, and they still had some wood paneling, some fun little features here and there that you can doll up here and there. But yeah, they didn't have the floor to ceiling windows or the low slung roofs, but they still had a lot of the fun period pieces inside, the fun colored bathrooms and all the stuff that we love was in those too.
Right. Well, that actually is a perfect transition because the other thing I really wanted to chat with you about today is the post and beam structure
Yeah.
and how that's so prevalent, as you said, maybe about 6,000 of those mid-century modern houses, which I
Yeah.
think I think for you that's a Venn diagram is a circle of post and beam structure. Is that right?
For the most part, yeah. There's a couple that were, not, or half of the house is post and beam or not, but most of the known enclaves are post and beam, and then kind of even the one-offs on the west side of town are typical post beam. I'd probably say 85 to 90% or of mid-century moderns are actual post and beam.
Yeah. And that's there again, a slightly more rare here. We just it the advantage of a post and beam that you can dissolve big parts of the wall and do a
Yeah.
lot of glass just doesn't get you as much here. You need to have walls to keep the temperature controlled anyway. And
Yep.
so we do have them and they're wonderful and they're exciting and I love working on them, but they also feel
Yeah.
more precise and individual. But you've got a whole community of people that are living into these kind of houses. What do you see as the primary living advantages of being in a post and beam structure?
You touched on it pretty good of like I call it the tinkerability of the houses, which I love.
Yeah.
And this is always sort of the caveat of like get a structural engineer, verify everything, do all that first if you're doing this stuff. But the post beam structures are basically glorified barns, and so your headers run, typically the two sides of the house and your spine. Actually, you can see it right here. This is the spine above me, and
Hmm.
these are the two sides of it.
Going down in both directions.
And the rest of it is basically fluff. Like you don't, the post needs to remain and the beam needs to remain. Our Denver code has about 15 feet between the two posts to support for structure for these style of redwood beams that we had. But outside of that, the rest of it's kind of just funny walls. And like you mentioned, like we could take down walls, which we did in this property.
Hmm.
There was a transom window above, and we wanted a whole wall of windows. And all we had to do was take out the section below and build in windows below it. So that's what I love about livability is the tinkerability of it. Is if you want to move a wall here, move a wall here, again, double check with your structural person. But most of these structures really were built as barns that, as long as the post and the beam remain and the span is within your code for your local jurisdiction, you can really manipulate them super easy and change a wall to a window or window to a wall and move stuff around. Ours are all built over crawl space for the most part. So that adds a second easy layer to kind of manipulate that. If you wanted to move a bathroom from part A of the house to part B of the house, all you have to do is kind of drop the plumbing below, take it over, and pop it up on this side of the house, and it just goes through the crawl space. And then the wall you had to move likely wasn't load bearing because it's post and beam, so you just move that as well. So for that part of it, the livability, if you need to make it the house that you want it to be, all you have to do is, it's a lot easier process than, having a basement that's finished or a structure where, half the walls are load bearing, where you have to get new headers put in and new beams put in and really kind of manipulate it. Where in this sake, it's like, yeah, all you have to do is kind of move stuff around and you've got what you want on it. So that's what I love for livabilities. They're a lot easier to manipulate
Yeah.
to really make what you want is like your dream house than, having to really get a whole bunch of architectural plans. You can move things a lot easier here.
Do you feel like you see your clients who are buying and selling houses have really made a lot of changes to the floor plan, or are they still living into the general layout of the original mid-century first pass?
Yeah, a lot of I would say general layout, the two rooms that get changed a lot. And I know we're kind of in the transition zone in the general world for open concept versus partition concept.
Hmm.
And I know that's kind of changing, and this the 70s and 80s structures and design come back into focus. And it's a side tangent. There's certain styles that fit certain houses, and that's how these all got screwed up in the first place. Is a lot of people are shoving in the wrong style into the
Yeah.
wrong type of house. And as we move forward and mid-century becomes less popular to the masses, just a reminder to folks that you don't have to shove in the 80s into your mid-century. You can still live true to your bones, and it's going to be okay as things are changing. But the open living area for the main living space, I do see a lot of folks still for mid-centuries take down kind of that kitchen partition wall and really make the main living area one space with the kitchen and the living. And some of that is if the wall stays up, you get two good sized rooms, and some of that means an oversized kitchen and an undersized living space. Where when they're combined, you get a one living space that seems to function better. Again, depending on what builder it was or what thing. So that seems to be a big one, is kind of combining the living space with the kitchen space. And then I see a lot of kind of primary bedroom bathroom reconfigurations where most
Yeah.
of these didn't have a true primary ensuite. And if they did, it was likely a very small shower, sink, and toilet,
So
or
tiny,
there
right?
was not one at all that functioned. So I see a lot of folks that have, if there's a 3 bedroom up, they try to make a 2+1 where they do a 2 bedroom plus like a small office and then try to shove in a good size 3 piece, maybe 4 piece bathroom that actually is an ensuite for the primary bedroom. So
Interesting.
those seem to be the biggest change I see as far as like changing the floor plan is taking the wall down to make a large living space in the center, and then reconfiguring their primary setup to have a true ensuite seems to be the kind of configuration that's most commonly seen.
So I want to circle back on that for a minute because it's
Yep.
fascinating to see people happy or at least willing to sacrifice a bedroom for getting that ensuite bathroom access. And I know when I work with a client, it always comes up, and it's something that makes people so anxious because they're
Oh yeah.
afraid that even though they want it, that it's against the rules, that it's this sort of, oh no, I need to think about the resale value of the house.
Hmm.
But it does seem like the way that a lot of people are living has shifted. So it might not be that everybody wants to be down a bedroom, but
Yeah,
you'll
and
find
it's
someone who does.
right on for that too. I always tell clients like a 3-2 3 bedroom 2 bath configuration is the most ideal for in that bell curve that everyone's like that's kind of where everyone starts is that
Right.
if you're looking for a single family detached 3 bedroom 2 bath seems to be the minimum that most people will accept.
Yeah.
Um, that does play a factor of when I have a 2 bedroom to sell or a 1 bath to sell, both of those are very hard to sell. So
Hmm.
you're kind of this lesser of two evils of like, do I then sacrifice my three one to get a 2-2, or do I go from the 2-1 to a 2-2? Like what do you do to kind of make this thing
Yeah.
happen? Um, Basements are always the saving grace where I'm like, hey, if you can make a full egress that's legal bedroom in the basement, then you can easily lop off one of the upstairs and have a 2 up and a 1 down and keep your 3-2 configuration.
Right.
But I have a lot of folks that try to make that like 2+1. And I say +1 that you can probably legally call it a bedroom, even if it's 5 by 5 and you've got a closet and a window. But it's really going to be like an office that's up there. So you've got like a 2 bedroom plus office, which really seems to be the minimum today versus 3 true bedrooms is a office, a true primary bedroom, and then a guest room seems to be kind of the thing. So if you've got 2 bedrooms and a way to put in a half-sized room with a closet, that seems to be a way that folks are getting away with, shoving in a primary bath. Because that, like I said, both those are real tough to sell. Just straight 2 bedrooms and 1 bathrooms are they're tough. Especially if there's no room to add a 3rd bedroom or a second bath.
In the
Those get really
future.
tough. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's always a tough one to swallow. And there's always if you have to resale on it, talk to your local agent and just kind of see, hey, what do you think is the best return here? Is adding a powder room even maybe an option to the primary that it gives you at least some type of bathroom space?
Mhm.
Or is, making a 2+1 really the right solution for it? But yeah, I'm seeing a lot of folks that would opt to almost have a 2-2 or a 2+1 2 than, just a 2-1 and just kind of live with it. It seems to be that second bath seems to be a pretty big deal breaker. Again, depending on the house size and location and all that. But I'm not surprised you get those kind of questions of like, oh, which way do I go?
I know. And I can never, I mean, I can't, I don't try to answer it for people, but I do
Yeah.
encourage people to think beyond a hypothetical someone else wanting this house someday, more importantly than how you want
Yeah.
to live in your home right now. And sometimes people have a sense of like there's a timeline on how long we'll be here. We're probably going to move when our kids hit an age or when a job change is coming. And in that case, I would advise more being more conservative. But
Yeah.
I don't know if someone's telling me this is their forever home. I always just feel like you
There's
should
no
have the
way.
layout that you want, and
Yes.
someone else will probably like it too, or they can change it.
Yeah, and it's one of those that like, even if you decide, hey, 10, 15 years to sell it from now, again, maybe this whole partition room thing will be the very much norm and this, open living area that we have in mid mods, they'll go back to how they were originally built, and this will be shameful that I've done this and taken the wall down. So it's back to that, like, hey, maybe they really won't care about one bath in 20 years, or maybe they will care very much that you only have one bath.
Right?
And that's that, like, do what you want to be happy in it, especially if you've got 15 plus years in the property. At that point, like the equity gain over just time is really not going to make the difference between a 2-2 or a 2-1, because
And
it's
how you
15
lived
years
in
from
it for
now.
all of those years.
Yeah, and you were happy for exactly, and that's the
Mhm.
biggest thing. And uh, quick toe off of that, I very much get that conversation where this is our third primary that my partner and I have lived in. We had a condo we lived in and redid. We had a cliff made that we owned and gutted and redid, and then this one we've been in now for almost 9 years. This is the first one where it's like, we will never sell this house. Sure, we may live somewhere else for a bit, but it'll always be, within our portfolio. We're always going to keep it. And so we finally reached that tipping point of like, I don't care what I spend, it's a reasonable spend on things. Sure, it's, maybe it's over improving, maybe it's too specific. I don't care anymore. And that's that, it is a nice relief. Obviously, it's taken us a long time to build to this, and there's a lot of things that have gotten here. But if you really can look past that, like, you know what, I don't care what happens in 10 years, build the dang house for yourself. Like, do what you want for it. It won't really matter. If you've got a short timeline, be a little more cognizant for sure. Just be aware so you can get your return back. But 15 plus years out, you're fine.
Right. I mean, I agree. People don't feel, I mean, everyone has their own things that feel particularly spendy, regardless of the
Yeah,
dollar value. But
right.
if if what you value is being at home, you could go on expensive vacations, or you could over design your house, or you
Yeah,
could eat out constantly, or you could just be in your house that you love and spend more than the market will
right.
give you
Pick
back
which
on it.
one makes you happy.
This, yeah, I find the question on return on investment to be really a curious one, particularly
Yeah.
when people are telling me that the house is their long-term home. They want to stay there with their little kids until they're retired. And I'm just like, okay, so
Yes.
you can do this however you want to. There is not a rule. There is not a
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And you hit on to, return on investment, and, return isn't always monetary. It's I love coming home to my house, and I love my new primary suite that I built. And like, if that's what makes it great, that, you love your vacation, but you're so happy to come home to, this, that's the exact kind of trade-off of like, sure, it can be monetary always, especially if it's a short term, but there's definitely that long-term side of like, you spend a lot of time in your house, whether you think you do or not, you're there at least 7 to 8 hours a night sleeping at the very minimum.
hmm
That it's make it a space you're happy in, whatever budget that looks like. All the monies are just even a small little touch of paint here and there. Do what makes the space happy, because you're going to be in it, and that's an investment that returns back to just mental happiness in these places.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay. We should wrap this up, but I have one more thing I wanted to come back to, which is you
Yeah,
mentioned
absolutely.
the sort of swing of styles, and they do really go in and out. But I'm curious what you mentioned about the sort of 70s, 80s room division philosophy is maybe
Hmm.
coming back. Where are you
Yeah,
seeing that?
I'm starting to see a lot of the like, some of it's the overdone, in my opinion. I hate the word open concept, but it's not a concept because you actually did it. So it's not, it's actually done at that point. It's not theoretical. I think when you really got into just some of these houses that took down every single wall in a space that just to open it. And then you've got these weird corners of the house that you're like, what the heck do I do here? Because this is living, this is dining, this is kitchen, and this is lounge room.
Mhm.
I think obviously, the pendulum always swings. It swings too far one way and back to the other, applies to everything. That I think some of these, a lot of fix and flips that grazed it out, that opened up everything whatsoever to be an open living area, it went so far that it was like, okay, yikes, like this is too much. and they didn't utilize things, and this is a great example, obviously self-serving. I've got this lovely screen divider here behind
Mhm.
me that this kind of window wall you see behind me, our house is see-through essentially. So as you've been
Right.
here, the front part has giant windows. You can see all the way through where that section back there, where that door and open window is, that is what used to be an old bedroom, and now it's kind of a living space. Just in front of it, where the back of this wall was a washer and dryer room and a hallway. And then the space to the left here, that would have been the kind of living area, and to the right's our kitchen. That whole thing in our house is fully open. But I think the screen wall does a great division of space that says, like, this is kind of the living area.
Yeah.
This is, a different living area that's kind of dining, kind of kitchen. So I think that, defining your space can be in different ways how you do it. But I'm really seeing, I think, kind of the people are like, oh, I love my kitchen to be a little more intact. So when I burn things, it doesn't, smell up the entire house.
Mhm.
And it's just, again, it's this pendulum swing that, I don't think we're going to see the 1920s structures of where like every room is, 5 by 5 and perfectly stacked. It just seems that, the coziness of the spaces, obviously maximalism is making its way, it's come back into.
Mhm.
Um, I think that, maximalism combined with tighter spaces is just going to be a general thing. And sure, you can close back up your kitchens and that kind of thing. But the good part about mid-centuries is they just don't accept maximalism very well because they're very small houses. And
Yeah.
so, if you maximalism out, that's great if that's your style. It's just it does get very small very quickly. And that's a lot of the advent of this, modernist furniture was it was made for these spaces where low profiles, low to the ground,
Mhm.
very sleek lines so that you could have a full-size couch in a very small living space because it felt like it was not actually as big as it was. If you put one of the big, I call them the very rounded, floofy cloud couches in the middle of a mid-century living room, it's going to be a very small living room.
The 80s
And that's
Lazy
just a
Boy.
matter
Oh
of fact.
yeah. No,
Yeah,
it
it's
just
just a, like, they're really cool, but like, unless you've got that 70s tri-level with 8,000 square feet, like it just is not going to fit. And
it's
that,
not
as
gonna
much as you
work.
can love it, it's sorry, you can have one of the sections in a corner, but that's about it. So yeah, I'm starting to see a little bit of that come in. It's, we always see these trends. I'm really glad mid-century's had this long of a moment. Obviously, it's going to continue. It's really the takeaway of modernism, the theoretical thought behind it. How does a house live? How does it connect to outside? Wrapping back to the very first part of this, the big mansions that are just built as spec homes that are saying, hey, I've got 8,000 square feet lot. I can build 6,000 of it. That's built to every square inch of it versus which
Right.
way should we face the house? Where should the windows be? Where should the passive windows be? Where should the forward window, really thinking about that. Again, back to this when I do fix and flips, it doesn't cost anymore. It just costs us the brain power to say, hey, hold up, let's wait 1 week. Let's, sit on the site, Monday and a Tuesday and a Wednesday and just say, hey, the sun's coming from this direction. Let's make this eve longer, this one for the, summer, winter. That, makes a whole lot, even if it's a nice big square that's just a spec built, even if you, turn it 10 degrees just for this reason and extend this one eve, it makes the world of a difference in some of these houses. So
Yeah. A
always my
little
thing of like, just
design
spend a little more time
goes such a long
researching.
way.
It really
Yeah.
does. So I think some of the stuff will come back, and I think we'll see, some mid-centuries try to accept some of the 70s and 80s, where again, I think some of it can fit in these. These were technically style agnostic when they were built. Cliff May was a big proponent of that. But there is just a sensible reality at the end of the day that like maximalism and giant couches just will not fit in 1,200 square feet. Like it just,
Yeah.
you can try all you want, but it's just probably not going to happen.
It is, yeah. And there are houses that are better suited to that out
Yeah,
there if that's what
absolutely.
you're
Yeah,
looking for. So,
exactly. And I'm the find one of those if that's kind of your true style that you have to have that kind of furniture. But if we tried to shove some of that in here, as great as it would look, it just livability wise, it doesn't work, unfortunately.
doesn't fit as well.
No,
Absolutely.
no.
Well, I mean, we love these houses for their specificity, and
Yes.
that's part of the fun of it
Oh,
is
absolutely it is.
match. And what you get to do, I mean, what I get to do is take a house and fit it to the people that have chosen it, and what
Yep.
you get to do is match people to the house that they're looking for. And both of those are such essential steps in getting the right answer for houses and not trying to jam a square peg into a round hole in terms of style and substance with the
And
mid-century bones.
I think people are figuring that out. I know we're short on time for this, but it's nice to see in most parts of all of America, the housing market has slowed substantially, and so folks are getting a lot more time to ponder their purchases. Where before it was really, again, lack of a better word, a panic buying type of thing, where if they didn't buy it, it was going to go up 100,000. They were losing their 3% interest. It was just there was less thought behind it than just I need to get a freaking house. Let's do this. I gotta do it.
Yeah.
So now I'm seeing again pendulum swung a lot the other way. There's a little too much pickiness we'll have to work through. But it is really nice to see folks that, can see 10 houses, can think for a couple of weeks for the most part about, how can I live in this house? Does it work for me? Is it a long term? Is it a short term? So that's really nice to, have that time where folks can and ponder it versus like, well, this is the street I want. I don't care what house it is, and I have to bid 100,000 over, and here we go. So it is
Yeah,
nice to kind of see that change where folks are taking a little more time to ponder it and really make the right decision that this is the place they want to live at.
absolutely.
Uh,
Absolutely. And I think, that also is always going to swing back and forth, but it's a good
yes.
moment right now to see it having a little bit more breathing room.
Yes, which again, it's great for everyone. It's a little frustrating sometimes that there's, they want more than can actually be produced, which I would love to produce and that just doesn't exist. But the general sense of, having a little bit of time to ponder it has been absolutely wonderful to let, clients have even a night or two to sleep on it is more than they had before, where it was literally a matter of minutes where it's like, you want to bid or not? Because it's going tomorrow. So
It's
it,
been such a chaotic moment, and I've had so many clients who, mostly the people who find their way to me, got lucky, but they'll
yeah.
often be like, "Oh yeah, I didn't even know what mid-century was. I just bid on this house because location, blah blah blah.
Yeah,
Now I know
right.
what it is. Can you help me find it? Work it up to its potential."
Yes.
But that story happened a lot over the last couple of
Oh,
years,
absolutely
where
it did.
people just
It
like
just bought a house.
picked it, from the internet, maybe never even having set foot in it,
Oh
and now
yeah.
they're like,
Yep. Very
"Okay,
common.
here's what I have noticed that I like. I do like the concept of mid-century, but I wouldn't have chosen these things. Can we fix them?" And so that's
Yeah.
just been
Oh,
interesting.
absolutely. I'm seeing that too. And it's nice to see the exact opposite. I just had a new buyer call yesterday of someone that was like, we're very specific. We're very flexible within these parameters, but, it's very specific. And it's, my buyers are all very specific and, wanting a mid-century, wanting XYZ, wanting location. So it's been nice to, they're specific, but they're also patient that they're like, yeah, we can wait between tomorrow and 6 months from now. We know what we want and we'll jump on it. So again, nice to have folks to have this moment to breathe and ponder it. And lucky for the folks that stumbled into them and got the cool houses. But yeah, there were definitely a lot that were like, huh, I didn't know what this was. But this is pretty sweet. And I just happened to bid on it because like it fit the parameters of the time and it was a panic purchase. So here we go.
Yeah, panic purchase of a house is never really the ideal.
No, and it's luckily a lot of people did work out okay up until about 2022 that they could make some equity if they realized that like a year or two later this isn't the house for me, they could turn it and be okay. That's the nice part about the slowing is things aren't going up as quick, so to really make your money back is going to take 3 to 7 years, the typical time that it used to take. So that's a lot of this methodical purchase now as folks are like, okay, I can't sell this tomorrow for 100,000 more, so I really want to make sure if we're here for 3 to 5 years, at least get our money back.
Choose a house you
um,
want,
Yes, versus
like
just
it
like
as it
whatever,
is.
because in 2 years it'll be worth, twice the price, which was true, and they didn't have to worry about it. Or now it's really like it might not appreciate tomorrow, it might go down 2% tomorrow, and it could go up 5% in 10 years, but it's more normal and a more expectation setting of instead of, yeah, it's a cash cow, just pull the ATM lever and voila and slot machine. So it's a nice thing to see that that stuff is just slowed to a pace where folks can think about it, which
Yeah,
makes me happy and um, just better for everybody.
absolutely. It seems that way to me. Well, this has been amazing. I think we're going
Yes,
to have to make a plan to talk again
I
about
would
Denver,
love
about
to.
housing purchases and seeking, and how to really do right by a mid-century house. I always love to get your take on these things.
I would absolutely love to. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. And thank you so much for having me and catching up again.
Absolutely.